Good afternoon, morning, evening, everybody. I see that the numbers are gradually rising still on the of participants, but let's get going. We're delighted to meet you all again, and welcome to this session then as part of our ongoing eDialogue on the future of small-scale farming. So on behalf of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Foresight Food, IFAD and APRA, welcome. My name's Ken Giller. I'm co-chair of the SDSN Network on Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems. I'm one of your hosts today. Our network focuses specifically on SDG 2, Zero Hunger, and obviously that has clear links to SDG 1, Zero Poverty, when it comes to rural households and smallholder farmers in the less developed countries. Jim, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Ken, and welcome back those, and hello those that are joining us for the first time, and thank you all the speakers that have joined us. I'm Jim Woodhill. I'm the lead of the Foresight for Food initiative, which is working with a whole range of organisations to try and strengthen capacities for food systems foresight. In other words, really trying to take a longer term perspective of what the future sort of trends and uncertainties and issues are in food systems. So we're very pleased to be organising this together with SDSN, APRA and IFAD. Thank you, Ken.
Great. So as with our first session, we'd like to find out where the participants of the call are dialing in from. So Lauren, could you put up the poll if possible? So if you can simply click on the poll as to where you're dialing in from. The panelists can't vote on this, I'm afraid. And then we'll be able to come back to the poll and see where you're all dialing from later on. So while you're doing that, I'd say today our focus is very much on small-scale farms, those run by smallholder farmers critical to the global food system as well as to local livelihoods. We've been actually planning this activity for well over a year, but we were just about to launch at the beginning of the year in March. We were really knocked sideways by the COVID crisis. And then all of a sudden, rather than online events being something which was novel, all of a sudden everything's online and we're all sitting in front of screens at our work day by day. So rather than have another set of webinars, we decided that we'd actually turn this into more of a conversation, an ongoing conversation. And so we're running from July until the end of November, a whole series of sessions. And we're really doing our very best to try and get as many voices heard as possible. So we've created, if you like, a bit of an interactive platform. We are looking at then a series of these online discussions, but interviews, virtual workshops, backed by blogs and vlogs, so short videos, an e-discussion group, side events. And if you've got things that you'd like to organize as part of this, then please do contact Jim or myself and we can see how we can include your own activities. Our ideas are then that the outcomes of this dialogue are going to bring, which we'll bring together in the last meeting in November, that we'll take those into the 4th International Conference on Global Food Security, which should be happening face-to-face in Montpellier, but it's quite likely a lot of it will be online. So we'll be presenting there, and both Jim and I and a whole team of other people are involved in the IFAD Rural Development Report for 2021, which is actually a major input to the 2021 Food Systems Summit. So we're all part of this sort of ongoing discussion dialogue, and we'll be making sure that all of the important outcomes from these discussions will be actually taken forward there. So we opened the discussion on the 16th of July. You can find the recordings of all of the speakers from the 16th of July on our website. And since then, we've been inviting vlogs, so short videos from the field, which are trying to get as many people involved as possible, as I said. And they're also all there on a YouTube channel that you can actually view at your leisure. And we're looking towards having more contributions, as many as possible. So please do send in yours as well. You can mail them to myself, to Jim, or to Lauren Barredo, who's organizing for us today. So a few key points from the previous session. And Jim and I'll just repeat these. So the first one was that we have to stop regarding smallholders as one homogenous group. Of course, we're talking about millions and millions of people across the world. And we need to embrace their diversity, but also find ways of disaggregating that diversity in a way that we can actually tailor approaches to the local needs and contexts and actually address the different needs of different types of smallholders in a much more nuanced way than has often been done in the past. Jim.
Yeah, and I think part of the story come out of this is really trying to look much more critically at which households and which contexts have what sort of viable futures as smallholder farmers, which ones perhaps don't, what are the sort of mixes of livelihoods that farming households might need, and how we understand this in an overall transformation of small-scale agriculture that can both create viable farming systems, but also make sure that poor rural households are able to get a sort of living income that enables them to meet their sort of educational, health, food, and living incomes. And I think we're all very aware of how much diversity there is across small-scale agriculture, but sometimes we don't create sufficient clarity about that difference between different households and different locations.
So another point, which in a sense actually links to one of my own hobby horses, is the importance of markets. You know, we often hear people talking about subsistence farmers, and I say I've never met a farmer, and I spend a lot of time, well, pre-COVID, I spent a lot of time wandering around, particularly in Africa, talking to smallholders. And all smallholders are engaged in markets in some ways. They're not just sitting there subsisting. Everybody wants a brighter future. But the big question is which types of markets are actually accessible for smallholders and on what terms? And depending on the commodities, you know, some smallholders are integrated in international chains. You know, we see Unilever has nearly 700,000 tea growers in Eastern Africa incorporated into their tea chains, for instance. But they're often also very much involved in local markets and sometimes in both and sometimes in many markets. So it's not, if you like, the idea that we typically have of a nice linear value chain with a producer going through a wholesaler to a market, but actually very diverse networks of markets, which are very important.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I mean, the other thing is around the numbers of people we're talking about. We were very pleased to have the president of IFAD, Giller, to open our first session, and he really made a point that we need to be aware that if we've still got something like 500 million small-scale farms in the world, and we think about household sizes, you know, we still have some 2 to 3 billion people in rural areas highly connected to food systems, highly connected to agriculture, and of course this is a very large group of those who to some extent are being left behind in economic development. So it's not a small problem. It's a huge problem, maybe a third of the world's population. And so really understanding how we connect rural people into future food opportunities, how we think about the transformation is critical to the livelihoods and the well-being and achieving a much more equitable world on a much bigger perspective. And from that, given we had that discussion last time, in this session, we wanted to come back and really hear some very local practical stories about what this really means for people in different contexts, and hence our speakers today and what they will be speaking about.
Thanks, Jim. So before we go on to starting with the views of the panelists who've been very kind to join us today, we're going to watch one of the vlogs. It's a vlog sent in by a young farmer from Western Uganda, Jonathan Mugabe. And over the coming months, we plan to have many more vlogs from farmers as well. But Lauren, if you could go ahead and share your screen, it will, first of all, it's only a video of 4 to 5 minutes. We'll just like to listen to what Jonathan has to say.
Hi, I'm called Mugabe Jonathan. I'm a young farmer. as well. I work in the banana project. That is a normal project. I work as a field assistant. I've been helping researching, collect data. I'm a youth leader in the Rim sub-county. I do farming, banana farming, and I rear some pigs, you can see. Really, the youth here, like me, who are doing these projects, it has enabled me to diversify my income because even I have constructed a house from my project, banana project. Even I've encouraged the other youth, but the problem as youth here, we have a problem of land. You see, I'm doing banana on a small scale. Had it been I had land, I would have done enough bananas, but now I have done it in a small scale because of land. Us as the youth here, we have been engaged in agriculture because we have enough power to give ourselves labor. Then we are not investing too much, and the percentage of youth here, you see, in Uganda we are like 78%. So as youth here in Uganda, had it been that we are given skills, trainings, then we can do better in agriculture in the coming years. As of now, most of our youth are being engaged in markets, loading matoke, packing matoke, because they don't have capital to invest in agriculture. They don't have knowledge. They don't have land. Even now, agriculture is expensive because everything needs to spray drugs, like those things like that. But that is the real problem affecting the youth here. But most of them, if we have gotten trainings, we can really address them. Thank you. That is all I can give.
So thanks, Lauren. That's really nice. And it was great that Jonathan was willing to speak to us. When we've asked a number of farmers, they've often been quite reticent to share their views. So there we have a young farmer working in Western Uganda, and he's obviously taking advantage of projects in the area as well. But he really highlights this issue of the shortage of land for him and his colleagues, and particularly in a country like Uganda, where the average age, the median age is actually 15.2 years. It's the youngest population in Africa. Then obviously the burgeoning population there is really putting pressure on the availability of land for farmers to move, to invest and move forward. So we're really looking forward to getting more voices from the field. So if you can help us articulate and get in touch with people who'd like to join them, please do. Lauren, could we first of all then have the results of our poll to see who's online today, where they're calling in from? So not surprisingly, given the time zone and everything, we've got 50% from Europe, 41% from Africa, 6% from Asia, nobody from Australia and the Pacific. They should all be tucked up in their beds at the moment. And of course, for the Americas, we're also on a pretty difficult time zone as well. So thanks for that. And it's great to have so many people dialing in from Africa. It's a really nice way of us being able to connect. So Jim, I'll hand over to you, and let's get going with the discussion with the panelists.
Great, thanks a lot, Ken. And just to add, I mean, realizing different time zones, what we will be doing is synthesizing each of these sessions and making them available in a shorter way and a summarized. So the idea was that people can gain access to each of these dialogues after the actual event and still make use of them. So look, it's fabulous to have our panelists today. We do have a little bit of a focus on, more of an emphasis on Africa today, I guess, but we're very pleased to have AJ from India. We also have not quite the gender balance we would have ideally liked, and I think that partly reflects the balance of people working in the agriculture sector, but we will be making a big effort to increase women's voices in our next sessions, but we would particularly invite our panelists today to also bear in mind the gender perspective. But with that, let me just outline how the next hour will go. Essentially, we've got three questions we're going to ask the panelists. The first one is, what do you see as some of the really good opportunities for small-scale farmers in the location where you're based or you're working? And we'd like you to be as specific as possible. And for which farmers do you see those opportunities? We'd then like to go around and have another discussion about what you see as some of the key constraints, and we'll have a bit of a discussion about how those constraints can be overcome. And then we'll come back for a final session on what do you see as some of the main sort of transformational pathways that are needed to build on these sort of opportunities for small-scale agriculture. We'd invite you to be as challenging and provocative as possible, if you like. So we would like to sort of move beyond some of the general statements about small-scale agriculture in general. And we're also wanting to be disaggregated as possible, if you like. So really talking about which farmers are suffering with or have which sort of opportunities and which groups of farmers face which sorts of barriers. I'll ask each panelist just to give a couple of initial opening points, and then we'll open into a discussion. And if people are going on too long, I hope you don't mind me sort of jumping in and moving you on. But with that, let me go over to Teresa, or I'm going to ask each panelist just to briefly introduce yourself when it comes to your first turn. I think you probably do a better job of that than I will, and it'll reduce the time. But Teresa, introduce yourself, please. And from your perspective, what do you see as some of the really emerging opportunities for small-scale agriculture? Teresa, over to you. Teresa, are you?
Yes, I'm now.
Right, great. Thank you,
yes,
Teresa.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Yes, so my name is Teresa Ampadu-Boache. I'm connecting from Accra. I work basically with International Institute of Tropical Agriculture as a monitoring and evaluation specialist, supporting selected projects to check the progress, certainly with the basis of smallholder farmers. So, Jim, I guess I can go straight to, that's enough. Yes, so I can go straight to
Thank you.
Yes. One key thing through the work I have done so far, the biggest opportunity I have seen is the interest from the private sector to provide timely information to smallholder farmers looking at technology-wise. So currently we have individuals, you have private sector organizations who are saying that, yes, we have recognized the need for smallholder farmers to have access, timely information to knowledge. So we build all these platforms for them and all together with them. And I see this as the biggest opportunity. One of such, if I can zoom in, is one particular company we work with, for instance, in Nigeria, where they have a sort of bundled services for small-scale farmers, looking at even measuring your land to be able to have the right investment in terms of inputs and then linking them to markets. So I see this as a critical opportunity or a crucial one that if smallholder farmers are able to tap in, then we can really look at improvements in their general livelihoods. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Teresa. I mean, which groups of farmers, are really benefiting from this, and which ones do you think have the opportunities, and perhaps which ones are less able to tap into that?
Yes, what we have seen really, those ones with that kind of family capital. So family capital, also looking at, you have some access to mobile phones, you have access to connectivity in terms of internet. Those, we can say that about 60% already have access to such kind of services from the private sector. Unfortunately, majority, even if they have connectivity, is very limited. So in terms of this opportunity, then we are only focusing on, I will put in quotes, the few who are connected to, let's say, internet. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Teresa. And which sectors are you talking about particularly here?
Sectors as in?
Or sectors or value chains. What sort of crops are you seeing these opportunities for in the Nigerian context?
Yes, we talk of legumes. So we have tried in soybean, we talk of the cereals, we have tried in maize, we talked of cassava. So we have tried also in the roots and the tubers as well. So this can really cut across these value chains. And this is only in Nigeria. We have similar situation in Ghana as well, where different private sector platforms are existing for smallholder farmers to tap into. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Teresa. I'm going to suggest we sort of jump to another part of the world and come to AJ. And I know you're also a farmer in your own right.
Thank you.
So let's hear some of your perspectives about where you see some of the opportunities in the South Asia and Indian context. AJ, over to you. And introduce yourself as well once you start speaking.
Thank you. I'm Ajay Jakar. I am a citrus farmer in the northern Indian state of Punjab. I also advise my state on agriculture, rural India policies, and I work with the farmers organization, and that's my passion, and that's what gets me here today. Thank you for the opportunity. The question that you ask is, what are the opportunities? So I would, to define the opportunity, I think, so I'll just step back and say, what I think is a problem of a small farmer today is that he's more and more dependent on market forces for his own food requirement. And that may be a little contrarian to what we're talking here, because if you look at the number of malnutrition farmers, if you look at the number of poor farmers, it is basically small farmers in the world, if you look at as a percentage of people. Now, it's surprising that farmers themselves are malnutrition, and that is because we are becoming more and more dependent on market forces for our food, which was not there before market access and things like that started. So what I really think the opportunity is, the two kinds of opportunities, this goes for India and it also goes for Africa, because I've had the opportunity to travel in Africa and meet farmers there, is that we focus on backyard poultry, we focus on small animals like goat, pig, and sheep. We also focus on cooperatives. And this is what we focus on home gardening. You know, we open on home kitchens that you can meet some of your requirement yourself of your own food. Then you're better able to access the market at a proper level. And I'll give you an example from India. Because of the COVID, the food value chain got disrupted in India, as it got disrupted in all parts of the world. And those farmers which were associated with the milk cooperatives, they got a better price for their milk. Farm gate price for the milk was much better than those who were not associated with cooperatives. So a cooperative like Amul, which is one of the big cooperatives in India, did very well. The farmers got a very good price and they were supported and they came out much better. And versus farmers in other places of India, where cooperatives are not very functional, that they suffered far more than other farmers. So I think, so the key is, how do you get farmers to come together as farmer producer organizations, as cooperatives, to be able to sell their produce and to have a linkage where they are part of the owner of the linkage. You know, so there's a difference between a food value chain with a private company and with where you get part of the profit. So we'll go into this later, because that's where I think the opportunity is. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, AJ. And if I'm correct, what I'm hearing you saying is that part of the opportunity is actually getting farmers more able to feed themselves again, rather than only looking at a cash crop side of small scale agriculture, but then balancing that better with the value chain opportunities as well.
Yes, I think the priority has to be feeding themselves, and it requires a whole relook. And I really hope that the World Food Summit 2021 does look at this as seriously, because this is a major issue of small farmers. So we're going to make all efforts to get our points there.
Great, lovely. Thank you, AJ. We'll come back to some of your thoughts. Coffee, welcome. Nice to see you there. So could you give us a little bit of first introduce yourself, and then give us a little bit of a sense of where you see some of the opportunities from the work you're doing?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Kofi Asante. I'm a research fellow at the Institute of Statistical, Social and Economic Research at the University of Ghana. And I'm a member of the Ghana Workstream 1 team of APRA. We work on the oil palm value chain in southwestern Ghana. So maybe I would limit myself to a discussion of how the opportunities and the challenges, what opportunities and challenges I observe in the oil palm value chain.
Okay, Coffee, just for the moment, just keep to the opportunities, because we're going to come back and talk about some of the constraints in a second round.
Right. Okay. So I'll talk about two broad type of opportunities. One, which is policy related, and the other community related. In the past few years, especially since 2017, the agricultural sector has received a big policy boost from government with the introduction of the Planting for Food and Jobs, which actually has a subsidized fertilizer component. the subsidized fertilizer component has been running since 2008. And early field studies have shown that it's actually boosted productivity of farms and also household consumption and some livelihood benefit for farmers. So that's a good thing for farmers. And there's evidence from the late colonial period that farmers are able to respond very quickly to incentives. So this policy context actually provides good opportunity for farmers. The other opportunity has to do with the asset endowments of farmers and the communities in which they live. In our study on the oil palm economy in southwestern Ghana, we find 3 different kinds of small-scale farmers based on the assets they have and how they are integrated into the market. Those who are the most well-off are farmers who are able to enter into some kind of contractual arrangements with the large estates who are also processing, so Wilmar linked to Unilever, for instance, and who engage in the global market. But in order to participate in this contractual arrangement, farmers need to have some substantial bit of resources in terms of income from other non-farm activities or assets, large access to large plots of land, etc. So not all of them are able to participate in this. And below this rank, you have farmers whose assets are not that much, but they are able to invest in artisanal processing of their harvests. Artisanal processing allows them to enjoy a larger, bigger time horizon. So, for instance, they don't have to sell the oil that they process immediately, which means that they can actually bargain and get or wait until the price on the market is higher for them to sell. The third group of farmers are those who are cash constrained and who engage in a lot of distress sales. So these farmers not only are unable to engage in contractual arrangements, but it's actually difficult for them to join up with other farmers within the communities in order to, say, engage in some kinds of collective actions which may have benefited them. For instance, in pooling resources to buy a local processor, what they call the crammer, in order to process, or just to pool resources with other farmers in order to rent a truck to transport their produce to the next city or market to sell. So maybe I'll end here, and then if there's questions, I'll come back to it.
We'll certainly come back to some of the points and issues you've raised. So that's very interesting. I think you've also raised this point that was raised earlier around which farmers have which sorts of assets that enable them to engage in these opportunities. Regis, I think you have to leave us fairly shortly, if I'm correct. I think you're in strong demand for webinars this afternoon, so we might jump to you and then come back to the other panelists. If you do have to leave us, maybe just give us a few of your key points about both opportunities and constraints, and because I think you might not join in the next round. So, Regis, over to you, and introduce yourself, please, as well. You're muted at the moment, Regis.
Mute? Okay.
Now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Regis Chiko. I'm associate professor of agronomy at University of Zimbabwe. Also, I have an affiliation with the Michigan State University as an assistant professor there. Yeah, so I want to take a little bit different thinking about where the opportunities lie. I think the opportunities, from what I've seen in Malawi, lie with the young farmers. See, it's these young people who have been to Lilongwe, to the towns, they looked for formal employment and they could not find. Now they come back to the villages with a little bit of more zeal, more energy, like they want to compete with their faith fellows, with their peers who are formally employed in town, And here they're back to the village. And these are the guys who most of the time will come to your meetings. They tend to assimilate new information quite fast. And we could use this group of young, energetic people as the next generation of farmers who can be the nucleus, the hotspots for change. So I really see an opportunity that young people, while agriculture is not really for the young people, they want formal jobs in town, but here, a situation where you do not have those opportunities in the cities, in industry, they are forced to come back. And their parents are aging on, who own the land, they're aging on the farms, they are the next generation of farmers. And with ICT, we have all these tools now coming up, interactive voice response, extension systems that are everywhere now. And they have little phones that they can use to communicate, to get more information. I think this could be a group of farmers that can start a wildfire and revolutionize small agriculture in Africa. I fully understand how unattractive. I've listened to the video from 16 July, should have been Jemima, talking about how unattractive smallholder farming is. But when farmers, when young people are cornered and they have to take what was not their first priority, and then they begin to instill new energy into the system, I think we begin to move. A lot of what we've seen is farms that are stagnant, that are not going anywhere, and what we need is new energy in the system. I will not talk about how small the farms are and all the problems, because we know it's a big issue. Somebody, 16 July again, described this as ultra small farms. And these are the big challenges that we have on the farms, but we have to make do with what is available. Land will not expand. Just to wrap another point to do with the potential, we need to look at factors, interacting factors, land size, the land quality, and also the agroecology. I think our discourse has to involve all those three variables and see the potential of a land to support families. Now, if you take a 0.5 hectare farm in an arid area, low carbon and so on, definitely they will not be able to meet their calorie requirements, let alone the proteins and so on. But take the same land size, half a hectare, in a high potential area, then basically with good management, good extension, we have an opportunity to feed the family on such small farms. Again, we all like to talk about irrigation, water, so that the farms can be functioning throughout the 12 months. But that's a pipe dream at the moment. That kind of investment is not coming into Africa. Lucky are the smallholder farmers who are into bimodal rainfall seasons. They can at least produce 2 crops in one season. But in much of Africa, it remains that one season, and they have to utilize that one season and produce enough on diminished land sizes due to fragmentation. I think that could be my contribution to this debate, but true, there are big challenges that are there, but I want to look at the opportunities.
Great, thank you.
Positive, yeah.
Thank you. How much longer do you have with us? Do you?
I told the other team that I'll join them at 20 minutes to 3. So I have 4 minutes.
Oh, okay. So we'll just, given you've only got 4 minutes then, just for us to take on board in the next session, I mean, what would be 2 of the 3 of the really big constraints that you think really have to be addressed to pick up on some of the opportunities that you've mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, the real constraint is the poor productivity. You know, it's dry land farming, and the soils have been degraded. These are very old soils that have been degraded, and economists will always talk about inputs. And we know on these smaller farms without subsidy programs, in Malawi there is a farm input subsidy program, which creates an artificial farming environment. Without that, we want to see how many farmers will stand and produce enough for their family. So that's the biggest challenge. Reasonable, we want reasonable, farmers are looking for reasonable priced inputs so that they can do farming. Otherwise, what we are seeing now is farmers who have to then go for off-farm income. In fact, they're partial farmers. We see a lot of charcoal production. So at the end, the natural environment is at stake because they are trying to document production from farming business. They have to look for extra income from the natural environment, and we see a lot of degradation of forests and so on through charcoal trade. These are very, what I can call extreme and desperate measures to make a living because the farms are not productive enough. Basically on two things. One is the natural environment, where the rains fail many of the seasons, the soils are degraded, and the economic factor becomes expensive inputs. So those are expensive inputs have to be addressed. And to address that, basically, you need industries locally, not imported fertilizers. And without local industries getting nitrogen from the atmosphere or, from, some natural gases that are being found in Africa, without that being fixed into some ammonium fertilizer, we still will remain with very expensive imported fertilizer from India, from the Americas, from Europe, from Middle East. So those are the challenges we have to grapple with.
Lovely. Look, thank you very much, Regis, and thank you for jumping in on this one and having to jump between multiple different sessions this afternoon. But we look forward to keeping on engaging with you as this dialogue process unfolds through the rest of the year.
Thanks so much.
So let me go to Audax. Welcome, and please introduce yourself. And where do you see some of the main opportunities for which groups of farmers, and maybe giving us some practical examples from your work? I think you're on mute still, Audax. Lauren, any clues about what's going on here?
It looks like his audio maybe accidentally got disconnected instead of unmuting. Oh, and now it looks like it's connected. So let's try to unmute again, maybe, Audax. I don't know if you're joining on.
Hello?
Oh, there we go. Great.
There we go. Great. We've got you now, Audax.
Thank you very much. I actually got disconnected for some reasons, but I'm glad that I'm back. My name is Audax. I'm speaking from Morogoro in Tanzania, and I work for an organization that is a member-led, involving farmers, umbrella organizations, local and international NGOs, as well as the private sector. So probably I need to go straight to what I'm seeing as some of the opportunities. Hello?
Hello, are you there?
Yes, yes.
Okay, just keep talking, we can hear you.
Okay, so I could pick a few opportunities that I'm seeing emerging based on what we have been engaging at the country level, but maybe a few other opportunities on some regions, especially in the East Africa and the SADC regions. The first opportunity for me I'm seeing is the fact that we have a huge number of graduates, around 1 million young people graduating from colleges and schools here, and then most of these are not actually getting employment in the formal employment, and probably less than 10% are being employed. So when you talk about the sectors, agriculture has enormous opportunities to offer for employment to young people as entrepreneurs, as also, business developers, but also people can offer several services. For me, this is very, very important because for a country like Tanzania, where we have several commodities that are being produced, it means the young people can find areas where they can make meaning out of nothing and making sure that they contribute to the economic growth in the country. That's the first opportunity I'm seeing. The other one is actually very much linked to specific commodities. In Tanzania, we import edible oil, around 250 million USD annually. And at the same time, we have a lot of opportunity to produce edible oil through production of crops like sunflower. Why sunflower? Because it's one of the commodities that will take just a season to produce, and it is more of attractive because you don't need to invest a lot of money and wait for a long time as compared to, let's say, palm oil production. So for me, I'm seeing that as an opportunity. And luckily enough, within the region, countries like Kenya, South Sudan, Uganda, Zambia, and the rest, they also import edible oil. And I think for us, we are looking at it as one of the opportunities that Tanzania can produce more. At the moment, we are producing around 45% of what we consume. So if we are able to, to produce 100% and probably be able to capture the market within the regions, then we'll also be one of the giants in terms of edible oil production. And I think that is possible. It's not a long-term kind of vision. It should be realized in the nearest future. Luckily enough, at the moment, the government is also promoting agro-industrialization, or generally industrialization, as one of the agendas within the current government. So I think if the production is linked with the agenda of the government in terms of increased industries, then the young people, again, can also find a lot of opportunities for them to employ. And then the last opportunity I'm seeing, also I wanted to comment, is that's again at the regional level, but you can also talk about the continental-wide kind of. We import a lot of food-related commodities, around 35 to 50 billion USD annually as a continent. And in Tanzania, we are talking about 650 million annual import. So I think this could also be meaning that we can produce more because we have a lot of people to feed within the continent. The fact that there is a lot of demand, it also means it's an opportunity for us to trade. And that is linked with the free trade agreement that the continent, African Union, actually launched very recently. And I think it can easily be linked. What I'm seeing is about the policies across countries and across regions. They need to be harmonized. I'm also about countries being able to identify commodities where they have comparative advantage to produce. For example, in Tanzania, we produce a lot of cereals, rice and maize. These commodities are on high demand in neighboring countries, so we can also focus on that. So maybe in a nutshell, that is what I can share at this moment. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And I think that's really interesting. I mean, on one hand, you talked about the sort of opportunities from the young people that want and have opportunities for work, but on the other hand, how do you focus more on some of the actual emerging market opportunities and, in a sense, linking those two together? So thank you for that. So Haddington, we now move over to you, and then we'll have a little bit of a roundup from Steve before we start getting into some of the constraints, which have been sort of slightly mentioned in the background of your first round of inputs. But Haddington, over to you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to be on this webinar. My name is Hannington Odame. I work in the area of agricultural development. I'm the Executive Director of Center for African Bio-Entrepreneurship and also the Hub Coordinator of APRA. I see three priority areas which I think offer opportunity for inclusive agricultural growth. One is linking agriculture, or if you want to call it interconnectedness, connecting agriculture, which is not doing very well, with industries that are doing well. And in Kenya, for example, is the hospitality industry and the tourism industry. And especially in the area of food, whether it is food production, processing, and marketing. We see that in tourism and hospitality industries, still the cuisine, the kind of food that we provide to the tourists, is what they can get in Rome or get in Italy. We have not really tapped into our own African food or Kenyan food and be able to bring it to the level where we can provide it into the hotels and the airlines like Kenya Airways and the rest of it. So I see an opportunity for women and youth food entrepreneurs to engage in this area, especially if they are given incentives. Two is the area of what I refer to as intergenerational partnerships. A number of emerging middle farmers like myself who invest in the rural areas, but we suffer a big loss. We suffer a big loss because we are absentee investors and we employ non-professional labor to manage our farms. Many of us have lost a lot of money. And I think if young people were to be professional associations and gain skills and be able to provide services to these investors, absentee investors like myself, I think that could be a wonderful thing. They could create employment, but also increase agricultural productivity. The third area, which I think is crucial, is the emergence of disruptive technologies, which today we are benefiting from it, Zoom and the rest of it. There is quite a lot of opportunity, especially for the women and youth who have been left behind for a very long time, especially in ag finance, in areas of marketing, but also in areas of extension and advisory services. The availability of mobile phone, SMS, and mobile money makes it possible for these categories of people to be included in all types of value chains. Thank you.
Great, lovely, thank you. I'm going to move over to Steve in a moment and I ask him to give us a little bit of a perspective on whether we've just got a whole bunch of overly optimistic panelists here or whether you really see the opportunities. And then I'd also like to come back to all of the panelists to get a little bit of your perspective on the scale of the opportunities. So, are we talking about substantial opportunities for a very large group of small-scale farmers? Are we talking about opportunities for a much smaller group? And how do we understand the sort of match between the scale of the problem and the scale of the opportunities? And that can then lead us into a little bit more thinking about what are some of the constraints we need to overcome. But Steve, how do you see this whole story about opportunities? I mean, I know you're a bit of an optimist in the world anyway, but do we have huge opportunities? Are our panelists being too optimistic? What sort of scale of opportunities do you see, taking perhaps a slightly more bigger picture perspective? Steve, over to you. And don't forget to introduce yourself.
Hi there, I'm Steve Wiggins. I'm an agricultural economist and a researcher at the Overseas Development Institute, which is a think tank in London. And I've been working on agricultural and agricultural development and rural development since 1972, initially in Latin America, and since 1980 in Africa as an advisor, teacher, and researcher. And I'm part of the APRA consortium, just as Hannington and Kofi are. Yep. You said I'm an optimist. Yes, I am. One perspective you can put onto this is going back to the bad old days of agriculture in Africa, the doldrums of the 1980s and early 1990s, and the contrast that we see today with that. And I'd say there are probably three differences that we can see today. One, of course, is the growing urban markets and the higher value crops, the perishables, which give farmers more opportunities. The second one is more technology, more services, more rural service centers, access to inputs, advice, and potentially access to finance, although it's pretty weak at the moment. And the third thing is we do have better government policies in most countries than were seen 30, 40 years ago, better policies and a little bit more investment. Nothing perfect, a work in progress, but all of those things are better. Now, the things that my fellow panelists have focused on, the role of information technology, the opportunities for youth, and particularly the opportunities for youth in providing services, and services which are based on better information. I've heard young entrepreneurs in Kenya wax lyrical about platforms for farmers which they've set up as a private sector business, and it all sounds very promising. People have talked about inputs being more available, but inputs being costly, and the costs of imported inputs. And we've also heard people quite rightly talking about opportunities in agro-processing, opportunities for cooperation, opportunities for added value along the food chain.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Steve. So just going back to all of the panelists for a moment, maybe just a few quick words on what you see as some of the scale of the opportunities. And, you know, we often hear about how tight prices are for farmers, how small farming sizes are. You know, what's the sort of combination of prices, scale of operation, scale of productivity that is needed to actually make farming a viable opportunity for people, and how many farmers do you think can really benefit from that? So maybe just a few thoughts. Teresa, maybe we just jump to you for a moment. You may also like to sort of give us a bit of a perspective on where you see this you know, relating to women's role in agriculture as well. You need to unmute, Teresa.
Yes, I have. Thank you. Please, can you go over the question? Sorry.
Just what scale of opportunities do you see, and particularly how do you see some of these opportunities affecting women, and in which you know, which dynamics do you think are creating opportunities or not creating opportunities in terms of farm prices, productivity, farm size, for example?
Yes, so good you brought in the gender, because I had indicated that in the initial opportunity. And throughout the work that we do, no matter the categories of smallholder farmers you pick, you still see within there the gender disparities. So even if we talk of the farming or the farm household capital, you still see the diversity in terms of ownership of assets, let's say of mobile phones. If you talk of access to market, you still see situations where you have, a typical example is where you have both men and women as farmer groups growing soybean in a particular country. And I take, for instance, last 2 years in Tanzania, and you realize that when you look at the market and market prices, a study we did, women were actually selling most of their produce in the local market at a very low price. And then the men are rather integrated and linked to processing factories. Why these disparities? This really affects them, again, in terms of even their investment. That is one aspect. If I want to go back to the initial opportunity I talked about in terms of having the private sector develop all these platforms for access. Again, we just did some work with one of these platforms, Isoko, in Tanzania, and within 2 months, we realized that just sending information to smallholder farmers, we've been able to do that to 20,000 farmers within 2 months, which is so cool. What does that mean? It means that though we might think that these platforms are limited to farmers in terms of connectivity, in terms of having access to internet, in terms of being able to read, what do we do to make this much more accessible? So we talk of Android compatibility, we talk of whatever, but what are the type of capital assets that these smallholder farmers have? And how do you modify or customize this kind of platform so that majority of them can really have access? So if it's 70% of these smallholder farmers who really have access to mobile phones, are they all using Android? And if not, and some of them are using, in quotes, our long-term Nokia versions, how do you convert these materials, knowledge, into communicable materials for these farmers to access? And when we did that, within 2 months, it's 20,000 farmers, and you get their feedback. And again, you do it in the local language. So yes, it might be available, but it's about what is that challenge and how do we tweak that platform to be able to address it for bigger majority of them to access. Gender is really part of it, because that study, we first look at how many of these farmers have access to these mobile phones we are talking about. And again, we saw that it was less than 30% of women who had access to the mobile phones. The family has a mobile phone, but the man goes with it all the time. So if that information comes, and if for both of them, the man first sees it, and if he thinks that the woman's farm is just a backyard one, that information stays with the husband. So those are some of the things that we realize, and therefore it doesn't end just at disseminating that information and saying, I have sent 100 SMS. But what are the other gender dynamics that you need to do at the household level so that even if they have one mobile phone, that information can also be disseminated for the woman to have access to it. So these are basically the dynamics that we see. The gender really have a role to play. And what I don't really like throughout my work is hearing the word mainstreaming gender. I tell you, it gets lost. So what are those critical things, constraints that are facing these women? And one of the things we did in Tanzania was, okay, all these women are part of the groups we are supporting. So if they are only accessing the local market, what can we do at the group level to encourage the men, to give them access, also to be integrated and to have market from the local processing? And this worked for some of them, not that they were not willing, but they cannot compete with their fellow men. So, well, that is my take on that. Yeah. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Really, really critical points there. And I mean, I'm sitting here thoroughly enjoying this sort of richness of ideas and thoughts that are all coming together.
Thank you.
I am watching the time, and we could probably continue this call for multiple hours, but we only have half an hour left. So I will move people on to a little bit more some of the constraints, and maybe go to you, AJ, and you might like to pick up on some of the things you've just heard from Teresa. But you know what? Maybe coming back to this idea about the scale of the opportunities for who, and how do we think about some of the constraints to actually give the widest range of benefits to the widest range of groups if we're trying to tackle this whole large group of people being left behind. But AJ, I leave it to you to give us some thoughts and perspectives on what you're hearing.
So I think so. I will use this opportunity to focus on things that people normally don't want to bring up for various reasons. And one is, as a farmer in Africa and as a farmer in Asia will want, is that why are smallholder farmers not getting good price for their produce? It's because of subsidies across the Atlantic. Food imports drive down price of local food. It could be palm oil, it could be other produce. And I think it is a very critical point. And this subsidies in the West is just not driving down food price. One thing that is not mentioned, and it's a constraint, is the intellectual property rights of the private sector. Now, private sector investment in agriculture research is not funded by private sector. It's only funded because of subsidies that farmers get, which allows farmers to buy more expensive inputs. And this must be clearly understood of that it's farm subsidies for farmers, which is the investment that the private sector does. It's in the whole process. And there's another constraint I see with the food value chains. I'm a supporter of food value chains, but while we support food value chains and we support trade, it must clearly be understood that it has constraints. If there are 4 food value chain segments, and I think this is going to become very critical, specifically in Asia and Africa, because we are still at the beginning stage, and it will play out over the next 10 years, is there 4 segments. You have a segment for agriculture inputs, you have a segment of commodity traders who aggregate, then there's a segment who own the brands, and then there's the retail segment or the e-commerce segment. Now, in each of these segments, we find there are 4 or 5 corporate houses which control 60 to 70% of the trade. Now, this is how capitalism works. This is how it is going to work. So I, as a farmer, think one of the constraints is that the developing countries in Africa and Asia need to have stronger regulation against monopolization of the food value chain. And food value chain cannot be taken at the same length as something of a monopoly with motorcycles or with other stuff. Food needs to be taken as a commodity. And another constraint is that when policies are designed for food, farmer livelihoods don't become a part of it. We basically look at increasing productivity. We don't look at how increasing productivity drives down price of food. And I will just finish off by saying, we have a saying in my village which says that when one farmer works hard, he becomes rich. When every farmer works hard in the village, everyone becomes poor. And that happens because productivity rises. So I am for productivity rising, but the price gets suppressed and depressed because of subsidized food coming into the system. We need to relook at the food value chain. I may be diverging from what everybody is talking about. And you initially said that all panelists were very optimistic. I just want to put it on record to say that I'm not one of those panelists who's optimistic going forward. There are constraints, and there's a tendency in the debates across the world not to talk about these things, but talk about optimism. So let's be a little realistic here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, AJ. I think really important perspectives there from a bigger picture as well. Lauren, I was just going to wonder before we go to our next panelist whether you might like to just pepper us with a couple of the questions that have been coming in, and some of the panelists can also think about those a little bit in having their next round of inputs.
So maybe Jim, shall I go, Lauren?
Yeah, go ahead, Ken. Thanks.
I'd agree with Lauren. I've been watching the threads, and I see some of our panelists are actually responding to some of the questions as well, which is nice. I mean, there's a lot of stuff coming through, very rich. I think one of the things that is really coming out in many of the comments is this one around, local versus international. That's coming up in many comments, but also, which commodities and the like. And I mean, several of our panelists raised this issue of the opportunities for producing for local markets, for commodities like palm oil, but I mean, and particularly cereals and the like as well. But of course, those are the ones that AJ is really telling us absolutely correctly, which are governed very much by international prices, where essentially many of the African countries are importing those at a fairly low price, and where it's hard for the local producers to be competitive against those prices. I mean, that's absolutely clear. One of the reasons that we have such a large amount of cereal import into Africa. I mean, and the other one is I think, counterpoint to that is this idea of local production, and local production, particularly vegetables and the like, for high value for local markets, which of course is a great opportunity if you have access to water. And I mean, obviously you need irrigation nearly always to do production there. Or has come through several times in the chat, but also in the comments, the one about producing a more diverse diet in terms of a nutritious diet locally at the household level. And that's something you said as well, Ajay, that's something that farmers could do. But of course, that's often maybe not the high attention, because people are basically seeking employment outside the farm in order to make ends meet, and therefore not having the time potentially to producing locally. But I think this whole idea of how do you actually, if you like, protect your local market so that local farmers can produce for them. And I mean, I know this is highly unpopular, and we've got an economist on the line here in terms of Steve, dare I say it, but I mean, the whole idea that, maybe some of the developing countries need to put a few more barriers up to actually protect their producers so that they can produce for their local markets. I mean, I think that would be one thing coming out. There are also a number of comments coming up, particularly focusing on the potential of youth, but also the constraints that youth have, and that came through from our farmer as well, as to whether or not they can actually get hold of the access to things like land, and also the basic inputs they need to actually make farming sufficiently profitable. And of course, and I see Audax putting in comments, be careful not to lump them all into one basket, because of course, youth are also a very diverse group. So there's a rich discussion going on here, and actually a number of questions. One I'd like to throw back into the pot, and that's from Peter Gubbles, who's very active, I see, putting in lots of questions there. I think he's in northern Ghana, really saying most of the discussion seems to be focusing on the more favoured areas in terms of agroecology. And what about the drylands and the harsher environments where it might be actually much harder, also more remote from markets, harder to engage in the way that we've been discussing? So I mean, a whole range of different things coming up, Jim. Anyway, maybe you can push back to the panelists.
Great, thanks, Ken. Nice to have that sort of summary of what's also coming in on the chat, and we will be making sort of a summary of what's coming in on the chat as well as what people are saying. So please keep adding thoughts and ideas into the chat. That's super useful. So let's go to Coffee, Audax and Hannington to just give us a little bit of a sense of what you're hearing people say and what you see as some of the big constraints that need to be tackled to capture the opportunities we've been hearing about. Coffee, let's go across to you.
Okay, so thank you. Maybe I will start by touching briefly on a question raised by Peter in the comments, which has to do with the factor behind, or the reason behind the increasing in productivity. Yes, some studies have noted that it's because of the extensification rather than intensification. In my earlier remarks, I mentioned I was specific about the fertilizer subsidy, but the planting for food and job also includes provision of improved seedlings to farmers. And in the oil palm value chain in particular, one of the constraints in terms of why some smallholder farmers are not able to integrate into the higher end of the market, i.e. the estates, is their use of the Dura variety of oil palm, which has higher free fatty acid content, for instance. So inputs impose some constraints, and the program or the policy, by providing access to subsidized inputs, help farmers to overcome some of those constraints. Having said that, the program comes with its own constraints. So one of the issues which have been mentioned by other panelists has to do with inadequate access to extension services. And for so many years, the government could not recruit extension officers because of an embargo on employment, which was imposed because the country went for a bailout from the IMF. Now things have improved because the government instituted what is called the Nation Builders Corps, by which young graduates are employed in a form of apprenticeship, and many of them have been assigned as extension officers. So that has eased the problem a bit. However, the distribution of subsidized fertilizer and inputs was done by agricultural extension officers or agri officers in the district, which often took all of their time, giving them almost no free time to devote to the actual work that they were supposed to do. And the program has been, government has been trying to fiddle with the program to figure out a good way of solving this problem. However, the problem also comes with a lot of smuggling, so it requires constant monitoring. And I'll pick up the issue of smuggling because that's very substantial and it limits the abilities of poor farmers who actually need the subsidized inputs to benefit from them. So that's a big constraint. There are other constraints regarding the timing of the distribution of inputs, which, it has to arrive at a precise time for the application of the basal dressing and topping, etc. Usually it comes when the planting has already been done and the window for application has already elapsed. So that's a big problem or constraint on the policy side. But bigger problems remain outside the policy and in terms of the planting for food and job, but still related to the issue of policy. And I'm going to talk, for instance, excuse me, thank you.
Okay, go to this.
Sorry. So there's a huge urban bias in terms of government policy. This is well known in the literature on agri-economics and development studies in Africa. And I'll touch briefly on something that Ajay said earlier with regards to cheap imports. In our study, we spoke to the Oil Palm Development Association of Ghana. And although they appreciate the subsidized inputs they get from the planting for food and jobs, they would much prefer that government changes its policy in terms of tariffs imposed on imports. In particular, government recently reduced the benchmark value of certain imports, which included vegetable oil. And so this has affected all the players along the value chain, including the larger companies who participate in the global markets. Government, because of their lobbying, government reduced the benchmark, but they quickly had to reverse course because there's a more powerful urban association called the Ghana Union of Traders Association. And because of the electoral implication of government aggrieving them, the policy leans heavier towards these importers. And so, in spite of all the policy interventions and the possible productivity or livelihood improvement which could result, the full potential hasn't been realized yet because of some of these constraints.
Lovely, thank you very much. I think there's this sort of really interesting tension you were bringing up between what sort of support at a local level do farmers need, how does that match to the broader policy perspective from government, what's the balance between input subsidies versus tariffs, and how does all of that right mix come together to build up the sort of opportunities, and perhaps a need for some fairly radical rethinking about the way overall government policy mix works given wider changing circumstances. But let's go to Audax Hannington and then back to Steve for some wrap up around this. We've got 15 minutes left, so we want to come to a few sort of key thoughts on pathways forward. But Audax, over to you. What are you hearing? What do you see some of the big constraints? Where do you sort of connect with what you're hearing the other speakers say?
Thank you very much. I think this discussion is very, very rich, but I wanted to pick 2 or 3 things. Number one is actually the issue related to synergy in terms of strategies, in terms of programs, and in terms of interventions that are being laid down by different actors, be it like the financial institutions, be it the government, the policymakers, but at the same time also organizations like ours doing the research and providing the information. Let me pick an example. In Tanzania, we have a youth involvement in agricultural strategy. This strategy was meant to encourage young people to, to get involved in the sector. But one of the challenges in monitoring and evaluating its outcomes, it's based on the fact that I think the room was very huge in such a way that the young people found themselves everywhere, and by the end of the day, nowhere. So I'm talking about synergy is how do we ensure that we pick a few areas where we can engage women, where we can engage young people, where smallholder producers, and mobilize the government machineries, mobilize the private sector where possible, and the financial institutions to support that agenda for some time, like a medium to a longer term basis. And then after a while, you can easily, assess the impact by the end of the day. So for me, if you ask me, it's about the synergy and consistency in our engagement and giving time for such kind of intervention to bear some outcomes and measure the results. The second area that I wanted also to focus is outward looking, looking on what we can offer as a country or as a region, but also looking at outside the country in terms of what can the market offer out there, which we can easily deliver at a competitive price and at a competitive speed. And these are very, very important, and that's where we think institutions like IDS and APRA and organizations that are engaging in research, then can also engage in researching on specific commodities and see how commodities can easily be transported across regions and across country to ensure that by the end of the regions are food sufficient, but at the same time also encourage intra-regional trade kind of. The last comment that I wanted also to bring on board is women, young people, and smallholder farmers. All the groups, much as they bear the same name, but they are not homogeneous. They have different characteristics, and we need to take note of these characteristics and come up with intervention that will focus, for example, the young people who would like to invest in agriculture, but they are school dropouts. The young people would like to invest in agriculture, but maybe they are graduates from universities, and they are also from economically strong families. These may not be using a handy hoe, but they will be ready, to hire a tractor or even secure a loan from the bank. And then they are doing farming, but the way the technology they are using is completely different. So these are some of the comments that I wanted also to bring into, investing more in research, but also making sure that we give time for some of these to reap some results.
Lovely, thank you, Odex. Really, really interesting points there. Hannington, where do you see some of the big constraints? What sort of things would you change to capture some of the opportunities? And where do you agree or disagree with what some of your colleague panelists have said?
In most cases, thank you very much, Jim. In most cases, I agree with all they have said. I think the bigger issue here for me is having a comprehensive policy that touches on a number of things, local versus international, food crops versus cash crops, arsal areas or dry areas versus more endowed agroecological zones and wherever. It's because we don't have a cross-sectoral approach to some of these issues. And I think one of the problems where we don't have very effective policies. For example, in Kenya, everybody says we have very good policies, but implementation is weak for a variety of reasons. But I think the major thing is planning and implementing without proper data. Data is really critical, and over time that has been degraded. And so we have, streetwise advisories or pronouncements from politicians. And I think we have to go beyond that and reinstate. And this calls upon not only policymakers and others, academicians have a role to play, civil society have a role to play, to make sure that the evidence which is available is made into action by policymakers. What I'm talking about here is policy advocacy. If we don't talk, we talk of all these things, but there is no proper policy advocacy, all the policies, good policies and statements and incentives just lie unimplemented. The other point is, the last one, is the issue of there are so many technologies, innovations, advisories that are coming up. But I tend to think that the way we coordinate, the way we manage this knowledge, such that we link to the challenges facing societies and facing individual smallholder farmers, we can make much progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're getting pretty tight on time now. So Steve, back to you, and then I'll go around for one last quick comment from everybody. But Steve, where do you see the big constraints? Where are we making progress? Where aren't we? We've heard a balance between, is it about international trade? Is it about extension services? It is about increasing productivity? Is it about getting the whole policy mix right? Where should we be really focusing, if you like, for some of the breakthroughs to pick up on the opportunities?
Well, I think the big message, the message that I love to hear from all of the panelists came from Audax, where he talked about consistency and giving it time. Now, if we had a little bit more time, I could rattle on for quite a long time about learning from Southeast and East Asia. And we look back over 50 years in Southeast and East Asia, and we have seen huge transformations in rural livelihoods in agriculture there. And mostly it's been very, very good news, because in the late 1960s, when I was in high school, nobody thought East Asia could ever survive with rapid population growth and slow growth of agriculture. And it's been transformed over 40 years, but it's been transformed by small incremental stages. So Audax is absolutely right. Do the right thing and stick at it. Be consistent and stick at it. And Audax, what I would say to you is have a look at the research which has come from Dan Brockington's group looking at change in Tanzanian villages since the late 1980s and early 1990s. The stories are quite astonishing. Nobody thinks of rural Tanzania as the most dynamic region in the world, yet the changes that are being registered by serious studies of villages in Tanzania are quite remarkable. And that's not because government has been brilliant, but government has been supportive. It's put the roads in, it's allowed trade in a way that we didn't have in the past, and the energies of farmers, traders, NGOs has made a big difference. Tanzania is moving. I think in the next 15 years, we will be looking at rural Tanzania and we will be saying they've done the same things that happened in Vietnam, in Thailand, in the better part, in rural China, and so on. Yes, it's in the balance, but I think you're absolutely right. Do small things well, be consistent, keep it going. And that has been the success of Eastern and Southeast Asia. And I think it can be the success of contemporary Africa.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Steve. So what I'm going to do, given the 5 minutes we've got left, before I hand back to Ken for a very quick wrap up, is just go round each of you again and say, look, we're wanting to feed some of the thinking and the results out of this dialogue into the IFAD Rural Development Report and into the Food System Summit. So, you know, what would be one key message that you would really like to see coming out very strongly in those sort of big reports and thinking as we move forward? So, you know, just going round to you, what's one last key message about working constructively forward that you would like to see come out of this? So, Teresa, what's your big message? You're on mute. You're on mute, Teresa.
Oh my, good you see me talking. Yeah, so I will still go to Steve. So Steve, it's good being consistent. So I will take it from the opportunity that I first indicated about the digital technologies, which I think will give us a huge transformation at with the agricultural development with small scale farmers. I see it as a critical component for small scale farmers to have access and to create their own tools to, let's say, empower them to make decisions, and also for their businesses and for that household. Why is it, even if we pick the policy that we have been talking about, I'm very sure there are reasons why we have imports far less than the exports or the local. We have reasons for that, and it's simply because all these smallholder farmers out there have access, timely information, and therefore, how do we make use of this technology?
Right. Thank you, Teresa. I think that's, so your big message is really invest and make digital technology work for small scale farmers.
Exactly.
Thank you. AJ, what's your really most critical message you would like to leave us all with?
I think we should be focusing on human resources over infrastructure. With all the financial modeling, most of the money is going into infrastructure. And I think so we should focus on human resources first, which means especially the trainers. The trainers need to be retrained in their profession again and again. They need to incorporate digital technologies, as has been mentioned, in how they provide extension services and advisories. I would just want to leave that one point.
Lovely. Thank you. Coffee, what's your last big message you'd like to leave us with?
So my message may seem to slightly disagree with Ajay's, but not entirely. So farmers, from our studies and from other studies, there's evidence that they are quick to respond to incentive. However, the biggest constraint they face has to do with the material conditions under which they live. So once that is improved, once they have good roads, better integration with the markets, commodity exchange, and some of these things governments have put in place, but implementation is an issue. Once these material conditions are improved, they are going to respond to incentive and boost the rural economy.
Lovely, thank you, Coffee. Odax, and then Hannington.
Me two things. One is actually coming up with interventions that are based on, again, on evidence. For instance, when talking about young people in agriculture, or women or small scale farmers, then let us make sure that we are addressing the right group, even if it's the youth, even if it's the young people, with the right interventions, and then invest on them for a substantial amount of time before you can simply say you have learned and unlearned some of the good things and bad things based on what you are doing. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So again, coming back, getting the right data, getting the right evidence, make sure we're focusing in the right sort of way. Thank you. Finally, Hannington, a last comment from you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I agree with the others. The issue of synergy, getting all the stakeholders to get together to be able to co-create. If we put more emphasis on practices and create a buzz at maybe at the local level, we are likely to call attention to policy change.
Great, thank you. Look, I'm going to hand back to Ken just to give us a little wrap up, but thank you all very much for engaging in this. We've covered an incredibly rich range of issues. I think we've created another really good basis for taking this dialogue forward to cover some of these issues in more detail in next sessions. And it's also just really fabulous to be able to hear everybody talking away from a whole range of different contexts and countries, despite the sort of troubles that COVID is giving us. So thank you both to our audience and to our speakers for joining in this afternoon. And let me hand back to Ken for a quick wrap up.
I'm muted. I mean, thanks very much, Jim. I mean, you've eaten my time. That's probably a good thing, because it's probably impossible to summarize everything that's been said today. I've heard a lot of positive things, a lot of challenges as well. Obviously a big role for knowledge, but a big role for the idea that people respond to incentives, so needing to get the conditions right. We'll definitely take on board all of the things in the chat, and I actually typed a wrong message into the chat, but there's one down there which is basically that Lauren had put there earlier. If you want to contribute with a video, there's an application form. Please just do a video on your phone in the field, wherever, send it in. We'll put it on our YouTube, because we really want to try and engage as many voices as possible. I think that's really important. We're going to have at least 2 more sessions. It's a very fluid dialogue that we've got. We had about 60 people online today. We'll ask our speakers to respond to some of your specific questions that have come up. And I think that there are some really good points for discussion here. In the next session, we'll be actually going to regional perspectives, and we'll be taking on board, we gained some real experts from those regions to respond, and we'll take the questions and comments that are coming here, and we'll try and synthesize them a bit and really ask these experts in the next session to come back on your questions. Now, we're over time, I'm afraid, so we're going to be closed down very, very soon. So I'd like to thank very much our panelists, our presenters. Thanks to Lauren Barredo for organizing the dialogue. On behalf of the Thematic Network on Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems of SDSN, on behalf of Foresight, IFAD, and APRA, and a big representation from APRA here, thank you very much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. Please stay engaged in this really important dialogue. We need to find more tailor-made solutions which really recognize this diversity at all different levels, and we're dealing with a very complex problem. So we really need more input. So thanks very much. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, everybody. Very nice to engage. Really appreciate your input again.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
And keep linked. Thank you to our audience again.
Yeah, bye-bye. Thank you.